as it changes shape. So I think I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves, actually, because one of the things that we spotted before the panel was everyone here has pretty much very interesting job titles, and job titles that maybe didn't even exist 5 years ago. So I'm going to let everyone here just give you their name, they're going to tell you their job title, and they're also just going to explain to you where they come from and the kind of structure of that news organization. So you get an idea of the different backgrounds here. And then we're going to dive into some of the fun topics, I think. So maybe Anne, will start with you and then work our way down the line, if that's all right. So yeah, take it away, Anne.
Great. Thank you, Adam. Hi, my name is An Xiaomin. You can call me An. I have a pretty not less interesting job title than my co-panelist. Mine is a director of product at Midan. We're a small software company, about 17 team members, and but also we're globally distributed. We have teams throughout the Americas, the MENA region, and Europe, speaking many different languages, and we interface with a number of clients that also include folks in East Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. And so as we think about, our kind of conversation here is thinking about how we as a small product team often work with sometimes larger newsrooms that may have a different culture, and also startup newsrooms that are starting to build their culture. So what we think about as a software company is, one, how do we build tools that help with the collaboration, but then also how do we collaborate with this client base? And so I, as product manager, will often think both about the product, but also about partnerships, and will often work directly with the newsrooms, working inside the newsrooms, but also the challenge of being in San Francisco, where we're often disconnected from all of these other folks. How do we, I think something we'll be talking about is how do we maintain good communications and relationships with all the different folks around the world that we work with.
Hello. My name is Federica Cherubini. I'm head of knowledge sharing at Condé Nast International. Definitely a job title I don't think existed before. Condé Nast International regroups 11 early owned markets around the world, from Mexico to China, going through France, UK, Spain, Germany, India, Taiwan, Japan, Russia. I'm part of the newly formed central digital team. That is led by Wolfgang Blau, and we are working across region, across titles, across publication. And my job specifically is trying to connect the dots between all these different areas of expertise. So in my team, we have products, engineering, editorial, strategy, platform relationship, and everyone is working with all the different markets and all the different titles in establishing communities around areas and around topics, and my job is trying to link them all and share best practice, information, contacts, just in some cases, and making sure that everyone is part of what the others are doing.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Julie Pizzetti. I also have one of those titles like Federica's. I lead digital editorial capability at Fairfax Media. It's not a job title I made up myself. I'd just like to make that clear. But it is one that I'm enjoying. I've been with Fairfax for about 15 months now. And Fairfax is the biggest publisher, a digital and print publisher in Australasia in terms of audience and reach. It has the oldest masthead in the region. The Sydney Morning Herald is over 185 years old, so we have very traditional news mastheads intermingled with verticals like drive and travel and events, which are pretty well established, diversified elements of the company. So I serve editorial teams across the metropolitan mastheads and also the regional mastheads. So we have something like 165 titles. I don't know if I mentioned that already. There's a lot of data, and around 16 million people in our audience in terms of reach. And there's an enormous diversity even within Australasia. We're at the bottom of the world. It's largely Anglophone content that we're producing, but we have a regional grouping called Australian Community Media of many, many mastheads, from dailies to weeklies to communities, and then some very significant traditional titles like The Age and the Financial Review and the Sydney Morning Herald. So there is enormous diversity in terms of culture, and a newsroom culture, if you like, and enormous diversity in terms of needs. And my job, which sits at the intersection of sort of digital strategy, knowledge sharing and training and learning, and also newsroom transformation, trying to drive change, is a big job with a big title, but it's actually incredibly exciting to be at the centre of all of that, with lots of hits and misses, which we'll talk about. So that's me.
Well, great. So hits and misses is my turn now. My name is Guido Baumhauer, as you would say here, Guido. My job title is actually fairly old. It's 10 years old, and it's we called it by then the Managing Director of Distribution, Marketing and Technology. And the rumor has it, the longer the title, the less clear is what you actually do. So what are we doing at DW? All of you know DW? Yes, that's the spirit. It's, yeah, but he has a loud voice, so that counts for many. So DW is Germany's international broadcaster. So we have content in 30 different languages, and now you can easily understand if you do Amharic, Pashto, Dari, amongst other languages, and English and Chinese. So diversity in itself is an issue. So we have people from 60 different nations working together. So we try to get that under one umbrella and still cater to the different needs of the people that we try to add value to their lives. So we tailor content to their needs. And yes, we try to implement a culture which we love to call fail forward, learn from your mistakes. And you know, Germans have a high reputation for being the funniest people on that planet. We have a lot of humor. And try to explain to a German culture, we love mistakes. That's where we are, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that journey a little bit later. Thank you.
Thanks, Guido. Okay, fantastic. Well, look, that's maybe a fantastic place to pick up, is this notion of failing forward and being tolerant of mistakes. And Julie, maybe I'll come to you on that. And just sort of how important is risk-taking for your organization, or at least the tolerance of failure? And is there any ways that you practically try to sort of build in either mechanisms or frameworks that help you embrace failure and take it forward and learn from what's happening?
So I'll speak from the point of view of trying to build capability and skills, and absolutely encouraging experimentation and risk-taking. But we're a publicly listed commercial company in the grip of all of the upheavals that are being experienced globally, and another restructure underway now. So it's boundary pushing experimentation in a time of perpetual change, and that's the thing that's really difficult. Let's face it, it's bloody hard, to use an often coined Australian term. But it is also essential. You know, if you're not trying to build skills while pushing boundaries and taking risks, and hopefully producing content that engages audiences in new and interesting ways across new platforms, for a legacy media organisation, that's essential. So one of the ways that I'm trying to execute, my role is to essentially to develop an idea called project-based learning, which sounds really teacherly and academic, but it's the only phrase I can come up with to describe a process of trying to drive change through adopting projects that are experimental. So, for example, we wanted to increase collaboration between silos within newsrooms, and also to develop new audiences and build skills along the way. So the first major experiment we've done in that regard is a podcasting experiment for traditional print mastheads, which has been very successful and continues, and I'm happy to unpack that further. But essentially it involved looking at an area of major audience growth and innovation, and thinking about how we actually build capability, deliver quality content within traditional newsrooms. And so for print and digital journalists who had not been audio storytellers, this represented a huge opportunity to try and develop skills and different approaches to storytelling.
That's great, and I think we'll definitely come back to some of those points later. Federica, in terms of Condé Nast International, sort of how important is training to the kind of knowledge sharing that's sort of core to what you do?
So, of course, that's very important, and because our team is still pretty new, for us there is a lot of learning still in how do we establish ourselves and start working with these different markets. We publish Vogue, GQ, Wired, Vanity Fair, Glamour. So we have lots of different titles. And of course, what our team is there to do is support the company and the different markets in the digital transformation, in learning new skills, in experimenting, in innovating. So we don't have, of course, each individual market has their own training, but of course, by looking across all of their portfolio, we need to understand, what tools do we use globally, how do we all train on that, and what's the value and the difference between in-person meetings and online. So I am responsible for all the internal events, but of course, flying everyone around from Mexico to China to one location, it's not something that you can do every day. And so we're trying to establish what's the best that we can get out of in-person meetings to make sure that events, internal events, are then a process throughout the year, and they're complemented by video calls and every kind of digital masterclass or training we can do online.
What kind of what communication tools do you use? Are you big Slack aficionados, for instance?
Yeah, so we have started using Slack. So we use it, again, it's across commercial, product, editorial, engineering, so there is a lot of different communities and group of people who have a different use of the tool. Of course, our engineering community have a very specific use of Slack, and editorial is a bit different, or product, commercial. I think the challenge is when you're trying to look at something from a global perspective and have a tool that is used, that it's needed to talk and collaborate across all the company. It's also important not to forget that you're going in disrupting existing workflow, existing tools that 11 different markets are using. It's not just like a language barrier, it's a mindset barrier. So I think it's important to understand before deciding what is the right tool, is like what is the use for it, and how do you balance the innovation and the need to change and to experiment and to implement new tools with keeping what's good and what's already working.
And you, obviously, as a team, you've had a bunch of remote people working for your team, but then, of course, you also work very closely with other clients who are outside of your team, and you also design communication tools. So maybe just to sort of pick up on the point Frederica talked about with friction and getting people to adopt tools when it's hard, how do you sort of approach that with some of your clients, but also in your design work as well?
Yeah, I think with our client work, just reflecting on our different clients, ProPublica will prefer to use Slack. First Draft will be using Facebook Workplace, and then we work at the University of Hong Kong, which might prefer email and WeChat or WhatsApp. And so, because we're working with clients, we don't have the ability, for instance, to structure a specific tool. So often, I have to personally and our program team have to adapt to the different communications workflows and to really respect that, because people are coming from different technological cultures and different preferences for the specific tool set that they prefer to use. And so we need to make sure that we both understand how those tools are used, and then also to basically be logged in to all of them and really just find ways to manage that personally. For our platform for Check, which is a platform for collaborative verification, the way we're structuring it is that so it can communicate with any of those tools, should those tools have an API. So that, for instance, our first experimentation is to have Check working directly with Slack, so that all the notifications, all the activity on Check goes into Slack. And as we perfect and understand that, we would want to be able to adapt that for any different sort of messaging apps or communications tools that people are using. For instance, whether that's email, it's going to be a challenge with WhatsApp because they don't have a flexible API, they don't have an API that we can work with. So we have to be really cognizant of the need for flexibility with any organization's specific tool set.
Got it. Julie, how does it work at Fairfax in terms of, communicating with a wider sort of team and making sure the dissemination and the cross-pollination of ideas happens?
I think it's a work in progress, and it's a range of different approaches at the moment, partly because although Federica's team is diverse globally, we're on a giant continent. There's a 5-hour time difference between Perth and Sydney, so and another 3 hours to Auckland. So trying to stretch across all of those environments is difficult. We had a corporate-wide decision to introduce Workplace, Facebook at Work. That hasn't been very successful in terms of getting journalists in newsrooms to participate. I think partly this is because there were concerns around the convergence of personal lives and personal uses of Facebook and the public and professional lives and the sort of intersections and risk there. We have used Slack. We're looking again at Slack as a form of communication and knowledge sharing, but we also developed a first for Australia in terms of media organisations, something called the Fairfax Learning Hub, which is an internal website that also that hosts training resources, but also content about experimentation, content about different modes of working within our newsrooms, within sales teams, within product. So it stretches across the company. So it's a knowledge sharing hub, but also hosts courses. And within those courses, which use an open source technology called Moodle that a lot of universities use, we have working groups. So for the regional publications, this has been hugely successful. They are sharing story ideas, they're collaborating on development of those ideas, they're undertaking the learning and reporting back on the learning through those groups, and then participating in courses. Less successful in the metropolitan newsrooms where workflows are different, and where there is still a real desire for more face-to-face communication. So it's challenging trying to balance all of that and finding one single solution, I think.
Gideon, how about for you? I mean, you're working across 30 languages. You, as a director, are supporting some 1,000 people in your kind of wider team. How do you make sure that as you grow that team and as that team changes, that the culture, reaches every corner of your organization?
First of all, I think it's to admit defeat in the beginning and to be aware you will never reach everybody. And then, we went through a constant process of change. And I'd even say change is the new normal. The question is, does everybody accept this already? And, we were a shortwave organization many, many years back. And then in 2005, we scraped down the silos of this is not a TV or radio or online operation. This is the content production side. This is the distribution side. And we fully underestimated, we thought we were so smart doing this, but then we fully underestimated how much this change affected the people, how insecure they were, not being a radio journalist, but all of a sudden a content producer. What does that mean? Across platforms? Oh my God. And then you come in with these tools and say, well, it's very easy because, with this you can really see everything that the others do and you can share. And I go, no. Because the question is that was one of the hurdles we need to overcome, and I think we're still struggling with that, is to from the executive level to the project level, to really tell people, listen, it's about sharing. This is not about keeping the information for yourself so you know more than the others and so you feel more important or more powerful. It is really a different culture to make sure, improve people, give them the chance to be better than you are, and that helps DW to finally thrive. Then have a good example. Listen, this is where it works, and then try to sort of roll that out to others. But it's a constant process, and we do a lot of training, on-the-job training, and we're very happy to have our on-the-job trainees here. Some of them are in Perugia, and we learn from them as much as we try to give them an understanding of how we did things. And so it's hopefully a good exchange. But to keep that open mind, to keep that digital spirit alive, or to turn ourselves into a digital-first organization, that is the constant challenge we're facing.
Federica, in terms of your magazine titles, that's a different type of challenge, right? Because there's the incentive for them to work together, I assume, for Wired to work with one of the other titles, for instance. Is it there? Do you feel that protectiveness is there as well? Or are they actually more open because they don't really encroach upon each other's territory?
Well, editorially, and generally they are very independent and autonomous as title, but I think there is a lot of interest in learning from what has worked for the others and what can be replicated. there is a lot of reinventing the wheel. So even in, growth strategies on Facebook, or as Vogue France experimented with Instagram stories, and okay, so then what from that can be learned and be reused or adapt from France or Vogue China, and of course, especially in terms of publication and distribution, WeChat is very important in China, Line in Japan, that don't resonate with Mexico. But I think there is a lot of interest in collaborating, and sometimes it's easier said than done, because I think generally I've never met anyone internally who said, oh no, I don't want to do this. Then, of course, because everyone is busy doing their daily job, finding the extra time, finding that extra hour in the week to talk to all the other editors from around the world is not as easy. But I think, and that's one of the ways we're trying to use Slack, is as an instant messaging kind of tool, but also because I am specifically, a lot of my job is community building, so that the idea is that everyone who works in data across the different markets is part of the same data community. You can see a lot of troubleshooting or question, and then it's really nice to see how everyone is pitching in. You see a question on Slack, and then someone else pings someone else saying, oh, this person should be the right one to collaborate and to reply to that. It seems really easy, but taking, for many people who never met in person and are in completely different continents, it's really nice to see that happening. So I think it's very positive.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned those kind of communities inside the organizations. We were talking earlier about how Spotify works in terms of their organization of their company is very much matrix management. So they have full stack teams with a product developer, with a designer, with maybe content people kind of going across here. So they have teams working out for different products. But then, of course, they have a manager who manages all of the developers and a manager who manages all of the designers. And that kind of matrix management is something that I'm seeing more kind of newsrooms adopt, I guess. And from your point of view, like, how do you, because I mean, you're also a designer by heart, right? Like, this is your kind of passion and trade. How do you design for collaboration, right? Like, if that's not too vague a question.
Yeah. Designing for collaboration it's a big challenge, and really it's I think there are two values that we try to bring with our platforms. Is one is the kind of flexibility that takes advantage of the fact that people are working in horizontal and networked ways, because you especially in contemporary organizations, people who are working like in digital first environments, they're used to more of a pull model. You want them to come to the tool and use the tool and be encouraged to use the tool, and so you want to bake in that flexibility. On the other hand, you have a need for consistency, especially with organizations that need certain questions answered or that need to have structured metadata around this, and so we try to build in that structure without limiting that flexibility. And so one way we're tackling that is by adding in different checklists and tasks, so that people can come. You can have anyone contributing to an investigation in the platform, but then there's a set of questions that needs to be answered, but those can be answered by anybody. So you don't have this kind of top-down structure telling you, okay, we're not going to assign this to people, but instead people can say, okay, I can contribute to this part, I can contribute to this part, I can contribute to this part, and people are, throughout the investigation, you can have like 3 to 4 people contributing to a research on a YouTube video or a tweet, for instance, and verifying that. So that's one of the ways we try to take advantage of that. And to this point about global teams, I think especially when we're talking about different time zones are actually vastly underestimated as a challenge for building culture, because when I'm here in Europe, much of our team is in the Americas. It's very hard for me to find that time to actually communicate with them, and vice versa when I'm back in the Americas, being able to communicate back with the team back in over here in Europe in the MENA region. And so building a culture, with Slack, you can have these great conversations, and I come online later tonight, and all these people are talking, and I have like hundreds of messages that I have to catch up on, so that the benefits of live communication are sometimes lost because of time zones. And so that's something we're trying to do to really address this, is to have these kind of structured responses and workflows, so that I can quickly catch up on what was done while I was asleep, and then I can respond, and then while people are waking up, they can also catch up on what I was doing.
Got it. Julie, where do you sit on this kind of face-to-face collaboration versus the flexibility that remote working offers, or sometimes that a different time zone mandates?
Look, I think it has to be a combination of approaches. So where possible, it's still very difficult to replace the real benefits of face-to-face encounter. I mean, we're experiencing it here in Perugia. We're making connections that we wouldn't probably make just through online interaction. As big a fan of online community building as I am. So look, at Fairfax, what we've tried to do is to blend, using the Learning Hub, to blend remote learning and knowledge sharing through webinars that happen very regularly, monthly, in some contexts fortnightly. We're using Google Hangouts, for example, in Fairfax for internal communications and group scenarios while we experiment with all these other potential tools. We're also trying, wherever possible, to externally benchmark by bringing people in so we just did a collaboration with First Draft, did some training around verification and, dare I say it, fake news. I know we promised we wouldn't mention fake news on this panel.
Get out.
And trying to do some of that that knowledge sharing and skill development is very hard to do exclusively remotely, but in many cases it has to happen exclusively remotely. So for me, it's about with a small team trying to meet diverse needs for diverse outputs, trying to experiment with what works best for what team. I mean, in terms of declaring what hasn't worked, trying to develop a national approach across, or an Australia-New Zealand approach to training and learning across Fairfax and knowledge sharing was very difficult because of diverse needs. And so what we've ended up doing is pulling back to recognising that we can have some overarching approaches. So that would be, your webinars and integrating regional editors into whatever training we're doing where we can in the capital cities to try and get collaboration between the metropolitan mastheads and their regional counterparts. But we also have to run two tracks. We're about to launch into a huge piece of knowledge sharing and skills development work with the community titles, some of which are quite big, like the Canberra Times, so that the newspaper in the national capital is considered a regional in the structure, but they're still trying to scale digital capability. So they're going into a range of knowledge sharing and skills development courses delivered exclusively online through interactives, which has been a huge piece of work for my team, but needs to be done separately to what we're doing with the metros. So that was a very long answer to your question, but it's complex.
That's all good. So I'm going to get the audience to think about some questions because we're going to have a mid-panel break. So just hold on to them for a second. I'm going to come to Guido. But this is good. We have questions already. Fantastic. But just then, Guido, maybe you can also elaborate on organizational design, as it were, and if that's something you spend a lot of time thinking about, and also if you have any of those horror stories of trying to set something up or roll out a new team and then having to go, wait, we misjudged this.
Okay, well, first of all, I think one of the words within DW that we try to buzzer all the time is tools. If someone says, I need a tool, we go, meh, stop. Because usually they say, I can't work because I need a tool. No, hold it. We can work. The tool has to improve that, make it easier. Sometimes tools open up new ways of working, but the big question again is, do we have the right spirit to collaborate? And I think that's something we needed to understand in the beginning, something that comes up in that panel discussion, to differentiate between the different ways of collaboration. It's a different way if journalists work together, if it's about verifying sources, that's a different way instead of if you're just producing, developing an app or something else. So we thought for some time that agile was the cure-all to everything, and all of a sudden, so you saw these post-its on the walls, and people went like, "Wow, great!" So a post-it down on the ground means we've done it. No, I think we just lost some task. But then to really understand that it's not about this is what you get, but this is what we try to achieve within 1 week. It's a completely different approach to saying, well, I produce my report, and this has to be done at this and this time because that's when my show airs. So basically, that's the one thing. The second is the whole organizational thing. We keep on and still do keep on restructuring ourselves all the time. And if you look at this from a bird's eye view, there is no such thing as this one solution for a company our size. Or I say this is how you have to do it. Some companies go a tri-media approach and say this is how we do it, and that's the best way to do it. Others, do product management, put that on top. Then for others, it's more, no, let's rather have a lab approach, and this is where the action goes. And that's why I don't like this term newsroom, because newsroom is just such an old media term. it's a room, it's, you know, you inside walls. This is not what we want. You know, the whole idea is to have a completely different spirit. And I find, again, from our perspective, as we have not started from scratch, but we try to bring in new people and at the same time integrate those who were there already and create a, you know, something that both feel comfortable with. And not just be left out and say, well, okay, so that means I was a radio reporter, so now I need to do podcasts because that's close to what I did before, and have no understanding how I can sort of participate in the rest of what the company does. And I think one of the another challenge is for us that there is a huge misunderstanding when it comes to the phrase public media, because people think, well, public, that means we just define ourselves what is important. But all of a sudden, you have no excuse any longer. The audience is not only somewhere, and for us, the audience is worldwide, not only in different time zones, but different cultures, different backgrounds, but the audience gives its feedback all the time. And we can never say we don't understand what they want. We might misinterpret some data that we have, or we might be willingly misinterpret some data. Sometimes we might not have the data. But at the same time, what we need them to be part of what we do. And that all of this together means, yeah, I guess we will keep on reorganizing ourselves. And as I said before, I mean, to just accept this change, this constant change is the new normal. That's part of it. And we just need to, more of us need to embrace that. And that is, I think, the toughest challenge that I see.
Very good. Okay, then we'll throw it open to the floor if there's a mic around at the back. Let's take Ezra there in the middle. And then we'll come to you, sir. And then I think there was one more over here. Go for it.
The title of this session is called Scaling Your Global Newsroom Culture in the Digital Age. So I think a lot of us on the panel and a lot of us here, we're very familiar with digital. We've been doing this for a long time before a lot of, you know, traditional broadcasters came along. But I feel like there's a few kind of white elephants that haven't been talked about. And to give you an example, about a week ago, I spent 90 minutes with a traditional editor showing her analytics and why her videos weren't performing. And her response to me was, oh, that's because our audience hasn't discovered it yet, but they will in 1 or 2 years' time. So, yes, really. And so, my question is that for those of us who've been on this journey for a really long time, what would you guys suggest as ways for people who have that vision? I was listening to a podcast yesterday by Ricardo Semler, this Brazilian businessman, who said that when he came in, he just fired all of the old mentality staff, including the CEO and CFO, and brought in new people, and the culture changed immediately. So besides that tactic, perhaps...
You call that a tactic?
What would you do? Would you leave those people behind? Would you look for your allies who are open to change and willing to work with you? And the bonus question is to Guido, that may or may not be coming from me, is if it's not a newsroom, what do you call it?
Okay, so let's tackle the first one first. And actually, Julie, I think you work in a 180-year-old,
Almost 190-year-old
190-year-old organization, and you're also finding an interesting thing with print as well. So maybe you want to take that.
Sure. I mean, these are real issues, right? So we've, you know, many of us here have been either practicing digital media for 10 or 15 years, or studying it, or a combination of both, and we understand the revolution is here and that the audience has always been with us, but now it's in our face. So those things are the norm. But we do still have, and I'm not speaking specifically about Fairfax for the record, but we still have in our organisations people who are uncharitably described as dinosaurs, who are still struggling, and most major news organisations are in a process of renovation, which does involve a degree of, deciding to shed staff and thinking about how do we renew. Is it through traineeship programs? Is it also through, hiring externally so that you can do the sort of international external benchmarking thing? So those sorts of strategies are effective and useful, but so is, I think, creating space where people who are maybe in that category of, dinosaur, terrible label, can still feel safe to ask questions that those of us who've been at this for a long time are impatient with. And I actually am not giving up on the transformation process. I would much rather especially in a legacy media environment which involves really high calibre, high quality journalism at its core, the thought of losing in my organisation some of the people who practice groundbreaking investigative journalism, who have been within a print institution for 40 odd years, you know, and throwing them out because they don't necessarily engage the way we might like with audiences, for example. I think that's, you know, a really problematic approach. So I'm all for the transformation, but I'll acknowledge that it's difficult. And there will be some cases where you have to just put up your hands and go, you know, this stellar columnist who brings large readership without any kind of engagement is still a valuable asset in terms of our digital reach. But the other problem, sorry, can I just add one more thought? The other problem that I think we have, and we haven't yet figured out how to deal with, is that we're not just talking about a transformation process that leads to a digital capability set and audience engagement and audience reach being, you know, spectacularly different to what we knew in print, for example. It's constant, it's perpetual change, it's constant redefinition of what digital journalism is. We're not just on a journey where digital capability and journalistic output are here, and we get there and we go, hello. I mean, we know that, but that's hard. Like, how do you actually develop the resilience and the you know, for perpetual cultural renovation? That's the bigger question, I think.
So, well, maybe Guido, you want to jump in, and then we'll come to Federica.
I guess one thing is, I guess, if being asked what is important, we would all answer, well, diversity is so important. But the moment we realize that we already have a lot of diversity at our companies, even without bringing in people from diverse backgrounds, a radio journalist brings in a lot different mindset, a different set of know-how into that process. And the question is, do we value this, or do we just say, well, this is your time is gone? We put you into that dinosaur part. And I would not want to be treated like this if I was the radio person. So I think it's all about us to be humble enough to understand, yes, times are changing, let's make the best out of it. But that would not happen, I think, cannot be successful if you don't bring in fresh ideas. So it doesn't work on itself. So the big question is, for me as DW, how do I make DW attractive to people to come and work with us? Because we are the coolest place on this planet. It's simple as that. The sun is always shining in Germany, and that doesn't tempt you? Come on, you know? So there must be a reason why we exist, and then we find organizational challenges. They are everywhere. The moment that Condé Nast International will grow, you'll realize, oops, all of a sudden, what worked with 17 people doesn't work with 70. What if you're 120? God, you know, new things come in. So, and you know, we all have this constant learning there. And what is it that stops people from changing? One is their own comfort zone, and the second one, I think, is fear. And so the question is, how do we enter the comfort zone of their work lives without inducing fear? And that's the hard part. And that means, for me, that means you need to talk with them, try to understand and learn from them, and not just stop listening. And to your bonus question, I hope I get a budgie for this. They are for free, so you can easily give it to me. I would again, the phrase newsroom in itself, I find just appalling. I would just call it, as I said before, digital first organization. For now, there might be a different phrase we use by next week, but for now, that sort of helps people to understand where we're going. And again, that's only because people at DW do label themselves as, first of all, I'm a TV reporter. Secondly, I might turn into someone else, and so that might help them to understand what we want them to do or achieve.
Federica, you're obviously Condé Nast. Your role in your department is basically this, right? It's change management, for that kind of sticky term. But like what are the practical approaches that you do to sometimes either break down these kind of walls where you find them, or to make sure that you do carry people along with you and you don't leave behind like vital expertise?
So our central team works mainly with digital teams in each market, but of course they work very closely with the print team. So sometimes those barriers don't even exist. Like many, even internally, how they structure reporting lines varies from market to market. So that kind of thinking of like a print person or digital person sometimes doesn't even make sense. And you know, first there is a lot that we can both learn from each other, especially in terms of, you know, we have titles, they're very specific in terms of niche publication. You know, Vogue, there is so much expertise about the fashion world and what Vogue is. So there is a constant learning. And in terms, I think, more for our own team, when I started this, we meet once every 2 weeks, it's called Show and Tell. So it's a way for the team to, because we need to grow as a team and to bond as a team, to introduce new starters. Everyone who's been away on a visit to one of the markets, on a conference, comes back and reports. We rotate, and each department tells the other what they're working on. And sometimes it goes back as like, this is how digital advertising campaigns work, where it's a way to get everyone on board and be a bit more simple of how things work, and get everyone familiar with terms that sometimes you hear and keep repeating, but you don't exactly know what it means or how it works. And that was initially thought to be for our team, and we had so much interest in other departments from the company, and now it's an open meeting that everyone can attend. And when it was a small team, when I started we were 11, that was super easy to say, we'll just shout at the person at the desk there and you'll know what they're working on. But it's super easy to stop doing it and seeing people around the office that you don't really know who they are. So that kind of culture that everyone is supposed to know each other. We have a buddy scheme, so new starters get paired with people from other departments, because of course you'll get to know very well your own team. But the first week you have someone from another department, like shows you around, coffee, and like introduce you to people. And that's everything it's done to try to really invest in a collaboration through personal contact. That's for our team. It's something we cannot do in person for like 11 markets. But that's the mindset behind it. So I will try to find a digital equivalent of that kind of approach.
And how might that work at Medan? Are these problems you also encounter?
Yeah, within our company, we're a software company, so we're digital first is like endemic to our culture, but often when we're working with an organization that might have a different mindset about experimentation and about digital, I think what's critical for us, and just to build on what the other panelists have said, is I think bridge figures, like for us to work with bridge figures, people who understand both cultures, the kind of traditional cultures and the digital first mindsets is really critical for us. And often projects will be positioned as a pilot to measure and understand the impact, and then hopefully translate that to the broader organization. So so I have less experience with directly with the traditional newsroom, but that's been our strategy sometimes with some organizations.
Great. Okay, let's go back to the floor. There was a question here in the front row, and then we're going to go over here, and then we're going to hop to the middle again. I'm sorry, Andrew. No. Oh no. He's got
Stole it.
now.
I'll take it.
You're causing havoc.
Hey guys. Hey, thank you very much for the conversation today. I'm Andrew from CNN Digital, that fake news company. If your manager said to you, I will grant you one wish, and you can't say pay rise or retirement with benefits for the rest of your life, that sort of thing, what would you respond with in terms of the topic today?
All right, let's have a quick answer from you, and then we can from each of you, and then we can hop to the next question. Go on, Guido, kick us off.
Implement an open digital mind into everybody working at DW. Digital mindset. I press a button and out it goes. That would be my wish. Still trying to find that which that makes that possible.
Sorry, can you just repeat the...
You have a wish?
Yeah, but for what
money.
objective? A wish of, a billionaire philanthropist is my wish, but... Yes.
Right. So your manager said, I'm going to solve one of these challenges. So, bang, tomorrow it's going to be next. What would be the one sort of top of that list that you would want the manager to approve, deliver, solve?
Yeah, I'm stalling because there's so many. But that's it's to be able to, for me.
Ferrari,
Yeah, no, it's trying to ensure that people are given the opportunity to experiment and to produce content that inspires them and inspires them to keep learning, even in times of dramatic change. So I think part of that, if I can boil it down, it's recognising that, you know, at the moment we're in the middle of a restructure, a very big restructure, difficult times are ahead, but an acknowledgement that it's important in parallel to have opportunities for development, for skills stretching, for creation of really creative content. It's the bit that gives you a will to live while you're going through this inevitable change. I think that's my wish.
I think mine's for video conferencing software that actually works, but
Definitely that. I would say time. Change, transformation takes time. You're trying to build trust between people. That takes time. And sometimes, you know, like, you have these like fancy job titles, like, okay, so now you know everything. Like, no, it takes time to talk to people, to build a relationship, to get to a point where everyone wants to share. So jumping in time would be fantastic.
And short of having a teleporter, I would love to have just more ability to travel, or to have more people co-located in newsrooms. Digital-first organizations, and to actually be present. I think we underestimate the value of being in person. I think, and having the ability to actually be co-located with people who are using the tools, doing these things is really critical. So if we can't have a teleporter, then more of a travel budget and more people who can be co-located in different regions.
great. This gentleman here has been waiting very patiently. No, I think you do for our translators, so.
No, you need to use it. I need to use it.
You have to, otherwise.
So, hi everyone. I'm Mario from Content Insights. We are a editorial analytics suite 3.0, so analytics 3.0. So my question is, just going a bit deeper, is how you integrate editorial analytics since you have 168 pieces, 30 languages, 11 different countries. So how do you incorporate editorial analytics into your workflow? And I will have the correct answer after. So.
Okay, very good. So maybe we'll talk about that, but also thinking about it from a cultural point of view as well, because editorial analytics is also something that's sometimes even a controversial thing to approach in a digital-first newsroom organization. So Guido, you want to kick us off again?
Well, I mean, as I briefly said before, I mean, being public media, there might be the misunderstanding that many people think, well, as public media, we define what is successful or not, so we don't need that much of editorial analysis. But to understand, with 30 different languages means many more commercial markets out there, and the audience does not care whether we have DW or want DW to be super good. We have to prove this every day. So proof's in the pudding. The moment we help editors understand that this software, this program, this thing that they are using improves their everyday work, it helps them, that's when the learning curve starts to go up. It is sometimes not too steep, I should say. We do still have people who fight things like SEO, because they think it might sort of beat their creativity. And that's the moment when I say, well, yeah, I do understand where this is coming from, but at the same time, if my article is not being found, if my video is not being used, why the heck did I produce it? So we always try to tie it very closely to, this is what the audience wants, this is what you did, and if there is a wide gap, how can we close that? And what kind of data helps us to understand better and improve things? But then, of course, if the improvement kicks in, you have to prove it and really show it. Otherwise, and if tools fail to show this, because the point is, you know, one can always argue, you know, there are figures going up here and going down there, and sometimes you have this overflow of data, and so that's the confusing part. So we try to follow the KISS example and keep it simple, and just restrict ourselves to just a few examples.
So we use a variety of tools that are integrated across a range of different tools. We have the daily emails. Journalists have access to dashboards. There are screens in some circumstances. So Federica has written a great report. I'm just going to give you a plug for the Reuters Institute about different approaches to analytics, and I think we're experimenting with a range of those. But I've never seen such success in terms of journalists understanding the impact of their work on audiences than I did, and now I'm going to seg to what I wanted wanted to talk about before, through the production of a podcast series that was investigative called Phoebe's Fall, which we did collaboratively between my department and the investigations unit at The Age. And what we saw was a hunger for the data. You know, instead of there being a concern about what does this mean, how am I going to be judged, we knew we had to prove ourselves because this was a new form of storytelling. And so the senior investigative reporters on this project, the video team, myself and a colleague, a consultant I brought in, we were hungry for the data, we asked for it, we responded to it, and having the audience engagement that comes not in terms of data analytics but in terms of real-time responses from a range of people who were invested in the story, that is something that I don't think you can ever replicate with data delivered in the sort of traditional way that we understand data analytics to be delivered. So that was a real eye-opener for me.
I, of course, don't work directly in that. We have a central data and insight team. I think a lot of our thinking has been behind, we have 11 wholly owned country plus licensee market. That means having Vogue in 26 markets around the world. That's a very powerful thing for a brand, for such a recognizable brand like Vogue. What does it mean to be Vogue and how different audiences, what does it mean for a Mexican audience Vogue compared to Paris Vogue, Italian Vogue? That's different, and of course there are different topics that resonate with different audiences. I think because our remit is looking from a global perspective, how do you keep a global perspective while never losing the local flavor of the stories and what resonates? That's a big challenge and what we keep in mind every day.
And I think for us, again, building software for other organizations, where I'm less involved in deciding editorial analytics, but it's as a product manager, is making sure I have a vision of what the organization, what their goal is with any use of our tools, so that as I'm thinking about our traditional product metrics like ease of use, time on site, conversion metrics, things like that, does that all feed into? Does that support the editorial goals? And if I lose sight of that, then I'm not doing my job well.
Great. So we have time for one more question. Very good. How to deal with dinosaurs. No. He's good. He's good. Is there any other questions on the panel? I mean, if not, I think we might just touch upon hiring, which is something we sort of talked about a lot, and I think we wanted to spend a bit of time on, which is obviously one of the things around scaling is scaling culture, especially is hiring the right types of people, but then retaining those types of people. That's a challenge, I guess. Judy, in terms of like hiring diverse people into your newsroom, how much of a priority for you is that in the hiring process? And then in terms of retaining them, how do you go about that?
Yeah. So I work between editorial and the corporate structure that includes people with responsibility for talent and performance and corporate engagement. So I think through a combination of involving people from different parts of the organisation feeding in knowledge. So newsrooms, we understand, I'm saying newsrooms again, but we understand how to tell a story, we understand the tools that are required to tell that story. We're less focused perhaps on the way audiences perceive our content, and I think diversity is critical to changing our capacity to reach new and diverse audiences. So diversity in employment is an issue that at Fairfax we're certainly aware of and are considering. It goes to cultural diversity, it goes to gender, but what's tricky is trying to get an appropriate balance, and at the hiring process, how much priority do you give to those elements compared to the extraordinary expectations we have now around number of skills, level of skills, capacities, adding diversity to the mix?
Just to add to that, I think it's the important part is to understand there are certain skill sets that you do not have or can't train. And I'm just wondering whether I can do something and she's not going to kill me, although she's just trying to hide behind that pillar. There is Angela over there. Angela, hi. I'd like to put you on the spot if you don't mind. She used to be a freelancer not long ago, but then she decided to sign up with DW and work for us. And maybe you could just pass the microphone to her. Can you do that, please? So yeah, that's why I said I put you on the spot. We have not rehearsed that. So it's really unfair. That's not what I mean. But maybe you can explain why you thought that DW is the place to be, although there are many reasons maybe not to come and work for us.
Well, I'm actually still freelance, right? Yeah, but I decided. Well, I decided
she's-
to go with DVW. I'm actually part of the DV News Lab or DV Lab, and yeah, I think there's, as you say, there's a lot of change going on, and I like that, and a lot of initiatives to go digital, more digital, and to push the company more forward. So yeah, I decided to go for DVW, and still freelance, of course.
But she's coordinating our digital lab, and that's something. For example, we have talked about: do we need a lab? Is that the wrong approach? If you want innovation in a lab, or what's the message you're sending? To the rest of the company. Does it mean you want to have innovative thoughts move to the lab, or do you have to convince her to coordinate this? But again, it was just a trial and error thing. So we try this and see whether this flies, and we believe it will. And so the big question will be whether we're able to retain great minds like her and convince her to stay on board. And that is a big issue for us. So we started very early days to train our own digital analysts, because we realized we need data, we need to understand more, and we trained good people, and they loved to work with us. And then finally, when the market developed, some companies came in and said, "Hey, great, you're wonderfully skilled. Why don't you just come and work with us? I pay you twice the salary." And here I am with my public media framework. And I said, "Oh, I would love to keep you. I can't put something on top." And so they left. And so I think that is, for us, that's a huge challenge to make sure that we keep the people and just don't continue to only train them for the open market. So that's one.
And how are you approaching that at Midan? I mean, technology companies often known to churn people quite quickly, and traditionally people don't spend more than 2.5 years somewhere or whatever it is.
Yeah, I think what's important for us is one of my product mentors has shared this distinction between culture fit. A lot of organizations prioritize culture fit versus culture add, which is try to hire people who bring value to the culture, to the organization, and to encourage that, and to build a culture that encourages these sort of diverse perspectives, because it ultimately does help an organization grow. It helps our products become stronger. It helps our team become more cohesive. But to also recognize that there is a discomfort with diversity. There is a human tendency for homophily to kind of draw, attract towards, like attracts like, and to recognize that discomfort, to work with it, to come to their team with a spirit of humility and understanding, but then to recognize that through that discomfort, you're actually processing different perspectives, and that helps. That makes a tremendous difference. There's lots of great research about the impact of diversity, but a lot of times the reasons organizations might struggle is because of some of the just typical discomfort and misunderstanding. So we try to promote that, try to promote understanding, humility, and really just respect for people's perspectives.
And Federica, yours is a relatively new team, I guess, and still growing. Yeah. Do you have a kind of profile of a certain type of person you're looking for from a creative problem solver point of view? Or?
I mean, because we're still a new team and still hiring, I think that's very much at the center of what we're thinking of, how diverse and how inclusive, as much as inclusive we can be. So I think that's just a daily thing for us. And I think generally I think it's very exciting to be in a position where you're looking in, we say markets and we say languages, but that's universe. There is so much you can learn from such a diverse groups and diverse titles and diverse background, which I think is really exciting if you think that you're part of a team, and the team has not geographical boundaries. It's a dispersed team. The thinking behind the community and building those communities is very much like that. Suddenly you don't have only your colleagues in your market. So suddenly you have 10, 11 other heads of data that work on the same topic in different markets, and those are your colleagues as much as the one that sits next to you.
Great, folks. We have to wrap it there. I want to thank Anne, Federica, Julie, and Guido so much for their participation, and thank you for your questions and coming along.
Well done.
There we go. Nothing is not mutual. Well, a minute.
different titles in establishing communities around areas and around topics, and my job is trying to link them all and share best practice, information, context, just in some cases, and making sure that everyone is part of what the others are doing.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Julie Pizzetti. I also have one of those titles like Federica's. I lead digital editorial capability at Fairfax Media. It's not a job title I made up myself. I'd just like to make that clear. But it is one that I'm enjoying. I've been with Fairfax for about 15 months now. And Fairfax is the biggest publisher, a digital and print publisher in Australasia in terms of audience and reach. It has the oldest masthead in the region. The Sydney Morning Herald is over 185 years old, so we have very traditional news mastheads intermingled with verticals like drive and travel and events, which are pretty well established, diversified elements of the company. So I serve editorial teams across the metropolitan mastheads and also the regional mastheads. So we have something like 165 titles. I don't know if I mentioned that already. There's a lot of data, and around 16 million people in our.
That's the spirit. It's yeah, but he has a loud voice, so that counts for many. So DW is Germany's international broadcaster. So we have content in 30 different languages, and now you can easily understand if you do Amharic, Pashto, Dari, amongst other languages, and English and Chinese. So diversity in itself is an issue. So we have people from 60 different nations working together. So we try to get that under one umbrella and still cater to the different needs of the people that we try to add value to their lives. So we tailor content to their needs. And yes, we try to implement a culture which we love to call fail forward, learn from your mistakes. And you know, Germans have a high reputation for being the funniest people on that planet. We have a lot of humor. And try to explain to a German culture, we love mistakes. That's where we are, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that journey a little bit later. Thank you.
Thanks, Guido. Okay, fantastic. Well, look, that's maybe a fantastic place to pick up, is this notion of failing forward and being tolerant of mistakes. And Julie, maybe I'll come to you on that. And just sort of how important is risk-taking for your organization, or at least the tolerance of failure? And is there any ways that you practically try to sort of build in either mechanisms or frameworks that help
our audience in terms of reach? And there's an enormous diversity even within Australasia. You know, we're at the bottom of the world. It's largely Anglophone content that we're producing, but we have a regional grouping called Australian Community Media of many, many mastheads, from dailies to weeklies to communities, and then some very significant traditional titles like The Age and the Financial Review and the Sydney Morning Herald. So there is enormous diversity in terms of culture, and a newsroom culture, if you like, and enormous diversity in terms of needs. And my job, which sits at the intersection of sort of digital strategy, knowledge sharing and training and learning, and also newsroom transformation, trying to drive change, is a big job with a big title, but it's actually incredibly exciting to be at the centre of all of that, with lots of hits and misses, which we'll talk about. So that's me.
Well, great. So hits and misses is my turn now. My name is Guido Baumhauer, as you would say here, Guido. My job title is actually fairly old. It's 10 years old, and it's we called it by then the Managing Director of Distribution, Marketing and Technology. And the rumor has it, the longer the title, the less clear is what you actually do. So what are we doing at DW? All of you know DW? Yes.
as it changes shape. So I think I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves, actually, because one of the things that we spotted before the panel was everyone here has pretty much very interesting job titles, and job titles that maybe didn't even exist 5 years ago. So I'm going to let everyone here just give you their name, they're going to tell you their job title, and they're also just going to explain to you where they come from and the kind of structure of that news organization. So you get an idea of the different backgrounds here. And then we're going to dive into some of the fun topics, I think. So maybe Anne will start with you and then work our way down the line, if that's all right. So yeah, take it away, Anne.
Great. Thank you, Adam. Hi, my name is An Xiaomin. You can call me An. I have a pretty not less interesting job title than my co-panelist. Mine is a director of product at Midan. We're a small software company, about 17 team members, and but also we're globally distributed. We have teams throughout the Americas, the MENA region, and Europe, speaking many different languages, and we interface with a number of clients that also include folks in East Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. And so as we think about, our kind of conversation here is thinking about how we as a small product team often work with sometimes larger newsrooms that may have a different culture, and also startup newsrooms that are starting to build their culture. So what we think about as a software company is, one, how do we build tools that help with the collaboration, but then also how do we collaborate with this client base? And so I, as product manager, will often think both about the product, but also about partnerships, and will often work directly with the newsrooms, working inside the newsrooms, but also the challenge of being in San Francisco, where we're often disconnected from all of these other folks. How do we, I think something we'll be talking about is how do we maintain good communications and relationships with all the different folks around the world that we work with.
Hello, my name is Federica Cherubini. I'm head of knowledge sharing at Condé Nast International. Definitely a job title I don't think existed before. Condé Nast International regroups 11 early owned markets around the world, from Mexico to China, going through France, UK, Spain, Germany, India, Taiwan, Japan, Russia. I'm part of the newly formed central digital team that is led by Wolfgang Blau, and we are working across region, across titles, across publication. And my job specifically is trying to connect the dots between all these different areas of expertise. So in my team, we have products, engineering, editorial, strategy, platform relationship, and everyone is working with all the different markets and